everyone. Today I'm going to be demoing how to make a skinny necked bottle, much like this. I went ahead and centered because I didn't want to waste your time watching me center, since the last couple of videos I did show you how I center. So this little piece is already centered, and so we're just going to take it from there. So to get started to build a bottle, I'm going to make a pretty tall cylinder, and I'll talk you through that. So I'm just going to go ahead and go into the clay. And if you think about a bottle, most bottles don't have feet. So I'm not going to leave a lot of clay at the bottom. So my cylinder is pretty much going to be, I'm going to take all the clay from the bottom and pull it up into a relatively large cylinder. So when I start to think about going into the clay here, I'm just going in and pulling back. This is Riverside Grit. I didn't realize that when I opened this bag. I wanted to throw with something darker for you guys so you could see a little bit better what I'm doing. The white clay is a little bit hard to see. But I didn't realize I was throwing with Riverside Grit. So my hands are a little bit raw from centering this. So I'm just going down and pulling all the way back, keeping my hands nice and steady. Okay. Making sure to clean the bottom each time. Making sure to add enough water as well. So I'm going to go ahead and check and see what the bottom looks like in terms of how much clay we have left to play with. And so right now we've got about that much clay, which is about a ½ inch. So we're going to go down a little bit further. So I'm going down and pulling back very slowly. See how slowly that goes? Nice and even pressure all the way across. And I'm just cleaning up with the sponge, just compressing a little bit. We talked about that last time, going back and forth across the bottom. Nice even pressure, compressing the bottom. Okay, I'm going to check again and see what the clay looks like down there. So we're down to about here. Sorry about that, about here now. So that's about all I want to go down. If I go down any further, I won't have a bottom left. So I'm going to stop there. And again, I'm going to take my sponge and just go back and forth. Going back and forth, compressing the clay. Nice, even pressure all the way across. I do that about 5 or 6 times. And then I make sure that it's nice and dry. Okay. All right, so now we're going to start thinking about pulling up the cylinder. If you think about the bottle over here, right? It was a cylinder. But when I made the cylinder, I left some clay in the middle so that we could pull that breast out. Because if you don't leave a little bit of extra clay in the middle, it gets really thin and it could break apart. Or you're just going to have a big thin spot there and it could cause the pot to warp in the firing. You could get some kind of stress fracture. That's really unusual, but you don't want a nice big thin spot in any pot. You want your walls to be even. Okay, so that being said, we're going to get started pulling up this cylinder. So I'm going to pull from the middle to the top. So that's from here, and we're just going to go up. And as we go up, this wall is going to grow. So I'm pinching in, using my thumb right here, and then these fingers go right on top of the thumb, and I'm just going to pinch. And as I'm pinching, I'm waiting for the clay to go all the way around once before I move up. So notice how slow this goes for me. Can you see how I don't move before I let it go around all the way around once? Okay, and then when you get up to the top, you're going to compress your clay so the fingers are pinched here, and you just add your finger there, like that. So we're just compressing that rim down. Good. Okay. And we're going to do that again. So we're going to start at the middle, and we're going to go back to the top. So we're just going to pinch in here, thumb there, fingers on top, and we're just slowly moving up. Good, all the way. And there we are. We're going to compress the clay here. Okay, so this wall already from the middle to the top is about 1/2 inch thick. And I don't want it to be any thinner than that right now because we've got a long way to go. So I'm going to stop here and we're going to start working from the bottom to the middle. And you see the bottom has a lot more clay down here. So that's going to take us a little bit longer. So I'm just making a nice ridge here. Excuse me. And I'm going to start pulling this ridge up to the middle. Okay. So let's start at the bottom. And again, my fingers are pinching here, fingers on top. And I'm going nice and slow. If you are getting dry, you can see this is getting dry. You don't want that piece of clay to tear off, so just go ahead and get more water anytime you need it. And Riverside grit tends to be dry, so I have to get water pretty often. All that grit makes it dry. And I'm just pulling to the middle. Now notice the middle moved up. So the middle is now here. But you'll be able to tell that by the thinness. You'll hit it and it's thin. So you'll know that that's where the middle has moved up to. Now as we start going up, I'm starting to think about leaving some clay here in the middle. Well, what's becoming a new middle here. So that's a thought always when I'm starting to pull the cylinder up. But we've got a long way to go. So we're just going to keep going here. And I'm going to clean the water off the bottom of the pot here. I'm going to go into the side and make my ridge again. And then I'm going to pull from the bottom to the new middle. Notice how slow I'm going. It's not a race, it's a marathon. It takes time, and clay needs to be pampered. So let it be nice and slow the way you approach something like this. So we're going up. Okay, now, so I've started thinking about this middle area here, the new middle. And I'm leaving clay here, right here. It's all right in here. Okay, so it's about that thick. And that's going to allow me to pull that breast out. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there right now. Okay. And I'm going to continue going up. So there's a good amount of clay down here still. And I like to keep my clay in a cone shape when I'm doing this, because if you start to let your clay go out, it has a memory and it wants to stay out there. I know y'all probably tried to collar your clay back in after it's been out, and it does all that wavy warping and wobbling and all that crazy stuff right at the rim. That's because you allowed the clay to stay out there too long, and it got a memory going and it didn't want to go back in. So we're going to keep that from happening by keeping this in a nice cone shape. You don't want to go too far in, but we're heading in that direction anyway. So you're going ahead and you're giving the clay the memory of going in, because once we get the breast done, we're going to be going in and up. Okay. So again, we have a good amount of clay to move here. So I'm just putting my fingers on it. Now my thumb doesn't reach down there anymore, so I just have these fingers inside for support, and I'm using these fingers on the outside to pull. So I'm going to start pulling. Now, this is the tricky part, because right here you don't want to get too thin, because you're going to be doing a lot of pushing and pulling up here. And so if this is too thin, then it's going to buckle, and then you're done. So we want to make sure to leave enough clay down there to support the pot, knowing that if there's too much clay, we can always trim it off, either by hand trimming, or you can use a chuck and trim it in a chuck. So if you want to leave a little extra clay down there just for security's sake, go ahead and do that, because you can always trim it off. I'm going to try to get all my clay up. So I'm going to go back down there and I'm pulling, but I'm making sure it's not going to be too thin. Okay, now I'm hitting all this clay right here where I've got all this extra clay. So I'm going to start to think about pushing this in a little bit. It's getting a little wide. So I'm going to cone this in, and we're going to come into a cone shape. Okay. All right, perfect. Okay, so now we have to think about this pot. Now, so right here I've got about 3/4 of an inch of clay right here. Okay? When it gets to be right here, I've got about a 1/2 inch. Okay? Down here, I'm looking at about 1/4 of an inch because I went ahead and thinned this out. So what I want to do now is I'm going to thin this part out a little bit to match this part. So we're going to start right here where all of this clay is left, and I'm just going to thin this out all the way to the top. I know you probably see what I see, which is a little wobble. There's a wobble happening. That's okay, because when we start to do the neck, you're going to trim off a lot of that as you thin the neck out and also bring it together. You always end up having to trim that off, just because the clay's so thin at that point that it'll stretch on you a little bit, and so it gets a little bit uneven. Okay, I'm going to clean this up real good so you can see. Okay, now I'm just going to pull from the bottom to the middle where all this extra clay is, just to see how the wall is doing. I'm not really going to pull very hard. I'm just really kind of feeling the clay as I pull my fingers up that side. All right, so things are going pretty good there. And then things are going pretty good here. So what we have left to do is just to pull the pot out. It's not that hard. You just have to take a deep breath and do it. And you have to do it a lot, because this is a harder shape. I've done some simple shapes this session, and I thought, well, for those that wanted to try something a little bit harder, this is definitely a challenge. So you've got your cylinder. Let's recap. Your bottom's about 1/4 of an inch. You've got a nice thinned out bottom here, nice thinned out top here, and in the middle you have extra clay. And you've been compacting your rim, making sure that it's nice and solid. We don't want any kind of loose rim that's tearing or wobbling or anything like that. We want it to just be nice and compacted. Okay, this is where you're going to need a tool, and I use a rib like that. I like this one better because it's a little wider. I always make sure it's nice and clean. I want that edge to be nice and clean. Okay, if it's not, you can always wash it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry throw here. And the reason I dry throw is because the more water you introduce to your clay, the more clay gets inside the crystals of clay, so the clay crystals start to separate. And that's what causes all that tearing and ripping. And this is a very intense shape, and you need the clay to come out. And when you have water on a breast that's really large and thin, it just wants to tear apart. So I'm going to take all the water off of this pot. So I'm just going to start at the bottom, and I'm going to start taking all the sludge off of this. Like that. See? And I'm going to take it all the way to the top. Now the inside is still damp. Yeah, it's a little wet in there. You need it to be wet on the inside. But not too wet. You don't want it to be slippery. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at the bottom, and I'm going to start pulling against that rib from the inside. Okay, and I'm going to stop just so y'all can see that. Now, it is wet on the inside, but it's just wet enough for my fingers to slide around the pot on the inside. It's not slippery like you would if you just had a ton of water in there. You do need some traction, so you don't want it to just be sliding all the way crazily around. Okay, so now I'm pulling again from the inside against the rib. And I'm reaching to this thin spot where we first started in the beginning. This is the very beginning of pulling from the middle to the top. Okay, this thin area. So I'm going to stop there. because all of this right here is going to be our neck. So we're going to keep it nice and happy and compacted. I have a tiny bit of water on the bottom. I'm going to get that off. Now, you always have to think, too, right here, is we're getting ready to start closing in. And as you start closing in, you don't want to have any water on the bottom of your pot. So continually get the water off until we really do close in. I'm going to pull one more time and see if we can't get it out just a little bit further. So I'm going to go down to the bottom again, and I like to keep this really clean so I can see what's happening. And I'm going to pull again. I'm going to pull all the way out. Like that. Okay. Now see, you could leave this and it'd be a nice shape, a nice vase shape. But we're going to do a bottle. So we're going to start thinking about closing in. I'm going to pull up just a little bit, and I've got a little bit more clay that I want to gather. So I'm going to do that right now. I did not mean to put water on the outside of this pot. It's hard for me to talk and think about what I'm doing. So I just made a mistake. I'm going to clean that off really quick. Now what I'm noticing is that this pot is growing more this way than I want it to. So maybe that's what I was thinking. I'm going to go ahead and just bring this in just a little bit. Now, if your pot's getting a little too wide, you can just start to push it in. My hands are like this, and I'm just gently coaxing it back in. And since you've already pointed your clay in that direction, by having it in that cone shape, it's gonna be pretty generous with you and pretty much go back into that shape that you want it. Now, let's try that again. Okay, I'm going to take the sludge off. And I just want it to go out. I want it to be a nice breast, but I just don't want it to be too far out. So it was good that it happened like that so I could show you how to push it back in. There. Okay. Now, I'm going to pull it out just a little bit more. That's better. Okay, again, it's dry on the outside, just moist on the inside. Just enough for my fingers to slide. And I'm going to make sure all the water's off because we're getting ready to go in here. And let's clean up down here so we can see what we're doing. Okay. Now, this is where we're going to reintroduce some water, but it's only here. Only here, because this is where we're working. Okay, so I'm going to start asking this clay to come back in. I'm adding water to the inside now, so it's just as slick on the inside as it is right here. Nice and shiny. We're done with dry throwing. That's only for doing the breast, but I don't want to reintroduce water there. It's where it needs to be. No sludge. It's going to be able to dry. I got a little sludge on there, so I'm taking it off. Okay. So when we start to think about going in and up, we're going to start pulling from here, using my fingers pinched like that. This finger's on top, and I'm just going to start pulling that clay towards the middle. Okay. And I'm making myself a nice ridge here. You see this ridge? I'm going to start pulling this in. So my fingers are like this. And I think what I'm going to do is try to change the angle of this camera so y'all can watch from the top. So just give me a second and I'm going to readjust that. Okay, I've readjusted. So now you can see it from the top. And so what I'm doing is I've got wet hands, wet pot. I'm just going to start pushing. See where that little ridge is? My fingers are like this and I'm just going to push in. Asking the pot just to simply go inside. And I'm going really slow because you have to go really slow, because see what happens is it wants to start to buckle down. And it happens, you know, pretty much all the time when I do shapes like this. It's not a mistake when it does that. It's just you're asking the clay to do a lot. So we're just going to push it back up. And we're going to do this as a series of times. We're going to keep doing this over and over. So every time I push it in like that, most of the time it's going to buckle down, and we just have to pull it back up with the fingers inside like this, and then just pull it back up, and then we're going to ask it to repeat. So we're going to do that again. So we're going to pull up our ridge here like this. Okay? And now I've got water down there again, so I'm going to try to get my hand down there and get that water out. Just be really careful about the water. Okay? That's done. Now I'm going to take my fingers like this, so it's like, oops, I just stuck my finger in there. I'm just cupping it and squeezing in. Now see, it's going to buckle down again. See? Right there. We're going to ask it to come back up. So fingers inside, and I'm just pulling that back out. Like that. And I use my rib to kind of round it over. I like a nice round pot. Okay? Now, this would be a beautiful pot right now if you wanted to stop, but I encourage you to take it further. So again, we're going to pull this up right here. I'm going to pull this up like that. Okay. And I got water down there again. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get my hand back down there. Okay. All right, so we're going to do this again. We're getting a little bit more and more gentle as we're getting here, because the clay has been worked really hard at this point, and it's starting to want to, you know, take a rest. And I'm just going to start cleaning this up. Okay, and again, same thing. I'm going to pull up like that. Then we're just going to push in. Notice how my fingers change because we're getting smaller. Okay, now it buckled down again, so we're just going to be gentle and get that water off of it. And sometimes it's easier just to do that with a sponge. Now I've got a little ridge right here that I don't like, so I'm going to reach in here and take that out. I just have the one finger like that inside as my brace against the rib. Alright, so now we're in, right? And we're not going to go back. We're going up from here. So I'm just taking sludge off. And we're going to start to push this in. Now this is the delicate part. So let's go ahead and prep for what we need. I'm going to take the back end of my needle tool. That's going to substitute out for my finger because I won't be able to get my finger in there eventually. And so this will substitute for my finger as we get up at the top. So that we're going to use that nice and clean. And that's about all we need. Now, I hope this clay doesn't tear apart. I've never tried Riverside Grit in a bottle like this. Sometimes gritty clays don't like to do this kind of delicate work. So if it pulls apart, I'll be sad. Okay, so adding water here. I'm going to use my middle finger because it's my longest finger. And I'm going to start pulling this clay up. And you can tell this is not a quick shape. You're not going to do this. You can, some people can, but take your time is what I'm saying. This is not an easy form. And if you get this far and you tear it apart, you're going to be sad. So just take your time. This is the hardest part of this pot, okay? So the whole thing we're doing is we're pulling up and we're pushing in. Pulling up and pushing in. Pulling up and pushing in until we get the neck that we want. Now, it doesn't look like there's a lot of clay here, but there is. There's plenty of clay. So we're going to push in again. And this time I'm going to go pretty much all the way in. Now if you don't take your time here, if your fingers are too strong and the clay doesn't want to move that fast, then that neck is going to tear right off. And it has happened to me many times. So just take your time. Don't overwhelm the clay. Try to be easy on it. So we're going to take our tool now and we're going to use that inside. So I'm pushing against the tool and thinning out the neck. And there's some water that's gotten here that I don't like so much, so I'm gonna take that off. Okay. So what's happening inside is I'm pushing against the clay with this and pulling with my finger like that. Okay? And then I'm gonna push in again. So now I'm just using these 4 little tiny fingers to go in. Okay, see? Okay. Now I'm going to do this again. So I'm just pulling my finger up the clay with the tool being on the inside. Okay. And then now you start to see where this gets uneven because the clay's stretching. So I'm going to just take this little piece off the top like that. And we're going to continue to go up. But all the time I'm taking the sludge off. Every time. Because we just don't want it to get too wet. It's so thin now. If it gets too wet, then we're going to have an issue. Now we're starting to get a little wobble here, which is fine. The only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to blow that wobble out. Okay? And if you don't like doing that, you don't have to do it. But it does help as you're building this up to keep the structure of the pot without you having to reopen it back up and do that, which is the other option. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to wet this down again, and we're going to go in, and I'm just pulling the tool, thinning out the neck, and I'm going to do that again. Again, we're starting to see where the clay's stretching, so we're going to have to cut that top off in just a minute. We're just pulling the clay up like that. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and cut this little top off again. Like that. And we've got a little bit more we can pull up here, so we're going to do that. And then we'll reshape the pot. Okay, I don't mind that shape. I think the neck can be just a tad bit longer, so I'm going to try for that. Let's try one more time. Okay, so I'm going to try one more time. I don't know where my sponge went. It flew off somewhere. There it is. Okay. Wetting down the tool again. And last time. Being careful not to push your neck over. I'm going to straighten it up. Fingers just like that. pretty good. So I'm gently gonna clean this up. Now, this neck is really, really, really thin, and so is the bottle right here. Okay, so we don't want to jeopardize knocking anything over or in. See, we want to be incredibly gentle with this bottle now. We've asked it to do a lot, and it's done really well. Okay, so now I'm just going to start to gently clean the sludge off. And I'm going to go ahead and make a little ridge here, cleaning all that water out. And then I'm going to take my needle tool, my wire tool, sorry, like dental floss, and pull towards you. And that's it. So thanks guys for coming. Let's see, I'll show you the end result really quick from not an upside down. There it is. And I'll trim off that bottom with using a chuck, so it'll be more rounded once I'm done. Alright guys, I hope you have a great week. Thanks for watching.